Starts a little more content.
Yes.
All right. Hareini mekabel alai et mitzvat haboreh ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. Hareini mekabel alai et mitzvat haboreh ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. So that's just one piece of some of the overlap. We sang that earlier because Rabbi Sandra invoked that earlier. Some of us have been together since Friday night online or live at CJC, and we're glad to have Columbia Jewish folk online with us and others. We are thrilled to have Washington Hebrew and Temple Sinai and Osa Shalom and the New Synagogue Project and maybe others all in the room. And this is how it should be, because this is at Adat Shalom, but it is not entirely of Adat Shalom. Rabbi Sandra represents Reconstructing Judaism, but also is a Jewish thought leader in the larger Jewish and in multi-faith and civic worlds. And we are thrilled that you are all here. So in a spirit of openness and receptivity, a reminder to keep questions and comments as short as possible so that we can cover a lot of ground in this last time that we have with Rabbi Sandra. And after that, let's keep the conversations going among and between our communities as well as within. Rabbi Sandra Lawson.
Hi, thank you. I have a whole outline that I can't find right now, but that's okay. It's there somewhere. Okay, but that so, and sometimes, you know, going off is I just would, I'm particular about time, and it's part of our training. RRC has helped us to stay on time. So, first of all, for you all who don't know, my name is Rabbi Sandra Lawson. I am the inaugural Director of Racial Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at Reconstructing Judaism, and I'm a graduate of RRC, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, in 2018. And I started this position at Reconstructing Judaism in March of 2021, and before that I was a campus rabbi at Elon University, and before that I was a student. Just to give you an understanding about terms. When I say Reconstructing Judaism, I am talking about the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College and Thriving Communities, which is our congregational arm of the Reconstructionist movement. When I say Reconstructionist movement, that adds in the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association. And so that includes all folks who wind up either working or being adjacent to our movement. So, but Reconstructing Judaism is an umbrella organization for the college and the congregational arm. I work for Reconstructing Judaism, and I am a member of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association. It's our union. And so I'm saying all that because people have asked and it's come up and people have found that helpful. Just to give you a bit of a background about myself, I have an undergrad degree and a graduate degree in sociology that focused on race, but primarily race and class, but primarily environmental justice. I know that came up the other day. I also used to be an investigative researcher for the Southeast region of the Anti-Defamation League. And so I did a lot of research and a lot of public speaking for the ADL in the South from this area all the way to most of Texas. That was my entire region. And my job was primarily focused on extremist groups, left extremist groups, and right extremist groups and individuals, but not like the folks like David Duke. There's like a lot of information on David Duke. Nobody needs to know, but people to research the underbelly, the people that were not on people's radar. I was also in the military, and my job in the military was primarily law enforcement. I had a specialty in investigations in child abuse and domestic violence. It sounds cooler than it is. I mean, it's like that TV show SVU, but way slower, like way slower. Well, not just, that's like fast for even the real world cops to do that work, but in the military, those things do happen, but luckily not as much. But if you want to hear war stories, I'm happy to, not like war stories, but I'm happy to share that. All of that, and I also teach. I used to be a teacher. I used to teach after I got my graduate degree. I needed extra money, so I adjunct in this area. Actually, I used to be an adjunct at the community college in Columbia and community college of Baltimore County. Is that right? And I taught intro to social problems. I'm saying all of this not so you'd be like, ooh, but all those things kind of make me uniquely qualified to do this work because I have a pretty diverse understanding of our society, how our society works. I also work with, understand law enforcement. And also my job at the ADL was primarily to educate law enforcement on extremist groups. So it's hard to put me in a box. This role that I have, I helped to create because of my own experiences as a rabbinical student and my experiences as a professional rabbi. As a rabbi who's no longer in school. And after COVID, because of my background, I actually started to get a lot of requests from members of the Jewish community. This is before I started working for Reconstructing Judaism. And these calls would go like this. Hey, can you really help us? Can you help us understand why everyone's so angry after George Floyd's death? Please tell me why, different conversation, why are people marching in the street? Why do I have young people telling me that we should do something? I thought racism was over. I've always known racism wasn't over, but now I can't ignore it anymore. And I got a lot of requests to do that. And it was fine. And I was paid for that too. This was not free labor. Well, sometimes it was. But that was really interesting. And so when I was ready to transition out of Elon, I started making some phone calls, and out of that, this role came. And the things that I was strongly was pressing that we needed to work on is that even I am invested in the breadth of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. But as the first person to staff this position, the urgency for me was recognizing our racially diverse student body who were about to come up and be rabbis, and the current rabbinic field of rabbis of color, and we are all sort of experiencing similar issues. So I was committed to trying to make our the world that our rabbinical students would inherit, our rabbinical students of color would inherit better. And but I can't get rid of the racism. I don't have that power, just so you know. I can't get rid of it, but I can do my part. Is it still too close? Y'all told me yesterday to eat. I know. And I don't
The
actually
rest
like
of
it
you
that
in
close.
the comments, please be right into the mic.
Okay, thank you. All right, cool. That's great. Okay, I'll put this in my face now. Okay. And it for rabbis of color, the amount of racism that they experience is just ridiculous. Can you hear me? I just want to make sure. Oh, okay. Do you want to come closer? You can sit next to me if you want. You want to sit next? I mean, yeah, it's okay. Here. Okay. Okay. So, but I mean, the invitation it still exists. You can totally say here. So I was committed to trying to find best practices and ways of doing this work. I see. And I didn't know how. I knew what I knew, but I didn't know how. Well, I was committed to creating an assessment of our congregations to get them to do the internal work. I didn't know how I was going to do that. So for the first 6 months I was in this role, I talked to anybody who would listen to me, who had been doing this work before it was cool to do this work. So people like Rabbi Mordecai Liebling, and he's retired now, but he's been a thought leader in this for a long time. Folks like Susan Talvey, she's a Reform rabbi in St. Louis. And also in that, I had conversations with a Black Hasidic rabbi and Black Orthodox rabbi. I guess I know they're both part of Orthodoxy, but they're still different. Just to give you an understanding of and lots of people in between. Some were friends, some were not. I would often take an opportunity if I was on a Zoom meeting with somebody, say, hey, can we talk for 5 minutes? Just to pick your brain. And what I had found is that many of these folks had tried things and they were doing things. And also that conversation included members of Audacious Hospitality and their leadership. Audacious Hospitality is basically is the DEI part of the reform movement. And I took, with permission, all the best practices that these people had done, and then I combined them into a pilot assessment. This pilot assessment, and also this was in conversation with Deborah Waxman, the CEO of Reconstructed Judaism, and Vice President Tressa Greer, and staff members of Thriving Communities. Every one of our Reconstructionist congregations has a liaison that they partner with. So I also was in conversation with those people. By the way, if you don't know this and you're a member of a Reconstructionist congregation, the folks in Thriving Communities Department are some of the smartest people I have ever talked to in my life. And it's all for me as a sort of person who sits in there, but not a liaison. It's almost like a think tank. Like people bring their problems and like, well, try this and try this and try this and try this. And I was like, wow. So just so you know, whoever your liaison and they are really smart. Yeah, use your liaison. They're great. And so I took the best practices, and then I had to Deborah was great. Deborah Waxman was great. I said, these are all my notes and my thoughts. We got to put this all together. And she helped me sort of like outline it. And then we had to figure out who were going to be our guinea pigs. I'm just looking at David. I'll say why. So we had to, not our guinea pigs, but we had to figure out how we were going to test this. And I knew that it would work. I just wasn't sure at the time if I could really get buy-in from people and they would see that it would work. But that's why you pilot stuff. That's why you throw spaghetti at the wall. And if it sticks, you keep doing it. So we decided that first pilot, those 4 congregations would present their findings at our convention. And the 4 congregations was one on the West Coast, Kadima, the Reconstruction Synagogue in Evanston, Osei Shalom here, and we had an international congregation or Har Neshama in Ottawa, and now we have we're finishing up the second pilot, and it's almost done, and then we will try to figure out how to launch this nationally. So, what is the pilot? So, like I said, I took the best practices. So, the first pilot had to consist of the diversity of our congregations. So we did geographic diversity, did size diversity, financial diversity, and we basically made a matrix of like, okay, who can fit all this? And we came up with 4 congregations representing, because we felt like that will give us a better picture of how this will work. And the congregations so one of the things that I learned from my conversations with URJ is they have an assessment, and I'm using parts of their material right now, and I shouldn't say URJ. What I had learned from many folks is that many communities have DEI subgroups, have DEI committee, DEI working group, whatever. And they're wonderful people doing amazing work. And at the same time, it does not do enough to move the needle as fast as it needs to move. This is an urgency. And if you don't understand why, I will explain that. So from those conversations, and I had a conversation with Mordecai Liebling, I said, this isn't right. And I feel like the DEI group is great, but it needs to consist of the leadership. It must consist of the leaders and the people who hold power in order to change the culture. And he agreed. I said, I need to get the rabbis involved. He's like, yeah, you absolutely need to have the rabbis involved. So in order to be in the pilot, the senior rabbi, in my vision anyway, it would be all the rabbis, but the rabbi has to be part of it. And then other folks in your institution that hold institutional power. So that could be the education director, that could be the executive director, that could be another rabbi. And it could also be a lay person, a president, or someone who has we all have members in our congregations who have at some point held all the positions that are available, know everybody, know the gossip or whatever. That's power. And they like to sit next to the new people or whatever. However, those congregations thought should be in this, and these are small groups, 4 to 5, and for our largest congregation in Evanston, it was like 9 people. And so they signed this letter of agreement, and I walk them through the steps of what needs to happen. So the first thing that they do is, let me back up a minute. This is why I need my notes. When I was hired, right before I was hired, as I was being hired, Reconstructing Judaism was finishing up a strategic plan. And the strategic plan was signed in 2021. And section 4, if you haven't read it and you're a Reconstructionist, I really, really encourage you to read it. And if that's too much, read the executive summary. And if you're really not sure why this is important, what I'm talking about, read section 4. But I really encourage you to read all of it, because you will understand why this is important to our movement, and you will understand what it means to be a Reconstructionist and invested in this stuff. So section 4 of the strategic plan talks about moving towards becoming an anti-racist organization and movement. Stumbling over the language because the language is active. It's not passive. It uses language that helps people understand that there's no finality, there's no end, and this is something you actually have to keep working on. And that was we have Black and brown board members, and they insisted that language be put in it. Shortly after that, Reconstructing Judaism passed its commitments to racial justice, and there are folks here who helped draft that. It was drafted by the Jews of Color Ally and Advisory group, right. And so it consists of a majority Jews of color and other folks. And it's right now being chaired by a former member of Adat Shalom, right? Lazora Jordan, who is awesome. And they're one of the chairs. So the work that I'm doing fits in that. And I'm also bringing this up because I've had a lot of conversations with rabbis who are, let's say, left of their congregations on this particular issue, and they're at a loss. And the first thing I say is, have you read our strategic plan? And the first time I asked that, like, no, I said, please do, because then this will help you articulate to your congregation that this is not Rabbi X's issue, because Rabbi X cares about it. It's because we are members of the Reconstructionist movement, and the movement cares about it. My language right now, this is the price of membership. If you don't like the direction of the movement, you can leave. I've actually said this to Deborah a few times, and they kind of agree, but that's not, that is not the language of the movement. That is language, Rabbi Sandra. But seriously though, because I asked that particular rabbi, are your members invested in being a Reconstructionist? They're like, yeah, we've been members for a long time. They see themselves as Reconstructionists. I said, then they need to understand that this is direction that the movement is going. Okay, so out of that, I created this assessment, was approved, we piloted it. And the point of the assessment is not about punishment. It's not about, gotcha, I knew you. And it is so congregations can truly assess where they are. I can't come in and fix it, but people need to be honest. Congregations need to be honest about who they are. And I say that because we have congregations that have said, we are not ready for a Black rabbi, but I swear we're not racist. That candidate you sent us was really great, but I can't hire them because I have board members that are upset, even though the board voted to hire this person. Yeah, y'all are gasping, but you've heard the phrase, you can't make this stuff up. It is really happening. And we have students who have to figure out how to navigate racism in the hiring process. There is only so much stuff that you can learn in a class. Internships are valuable to the experience of future rabbis. And when congregations or whomever don't invest in that because they can't get past racial bias, they're actually not helping future rabbis. The job of an intern, for people who hold, and I've told this to employers, the job of a rabbinical intern is your job is to help them become great rabbis. And if you don't give them the opportunity, they're not going to come to you as a rabbi. They're coming so they can learn. If you're so wrapped up in the racism, then you need to go back to your community. But your job, because you need an intern, because there are communities that need rabbinical support, your job is to help them become rabbis. I worked at a conservative congregation, year 2 or 3, and yeah, there was racism, but many of those folks still keep up with me today because they understood that, even though there was racism, but they understood that they were helping to shape me, and they're very proud of that. They are so proud. Like, I'm so happy. I'm so proud to watch you. You know, and that's really important. So. We have students that are coming to RSC. They're all students are dealing with a lot, but when you add, how do I navigate the racist questions I'm dealing with? How do I help that my future employer get past this? I'm tired of explaining how I'm Jewish. I'm tired of all these things. So that's in my background, in my head by putting this together. So one of the first things that they have to do, the folks, is they have to read our strategic plan. And I'm not trying to just say that because I work for an organization, it really is a good strategic plan. They have to read our strategic plan, and I make them read essays. There's several essays, and there's like 2 that are required. One is written by me. It's basically, it says, it's written by me and Rabbi Donna Cephas about understanding racism in the Jewish community from my perspective as a Black rabbi, from her perspective as a white rabbi, but all her family members are Black. Her husband's Black, her children are Black. And so we talk about that. And the other one, I'm blanking on what the other one is, but oh, is it Lesser? Yeah. So Rabbi Joshua Lesser wrote a piece about starting a conversation about racism in your community. It's a really beautiful piece. For people who've already read those or want extra credit, there's a whole bunch of like non-required, but I'm like, please read these too. Then they come together for a meeting and they discuss all that stuff. And then they are also required to do, if we have older sociologists around, they may remember Dr. Peggy McIntosh is unpacking the invisible knapsack of racism. Well, there's a Ashkenazi white Jewish version of that. It was put together by the Jewish Multiracial Network. And so I make them read that. And so what this process does is start to develop the understanding that people of color are having different experiences than white folks in our communities. And also to start to with the checklist of unpacking white and or Ashkenazi privilege, they can start to have some understanding of some of the experiences of Jews of color. And then at their second meeting, I have them using what they've learned and what they've read, I have them walk through their properties. The Evanston congregation did something a little different because of COVID. The senior rabbi walked through with everyone else on Zoom. And so I have them walk through all of the properties. That means the synagogue, if you have a school, and whatever other properties you have, and try to imagine, this requires an imagination, try to imagine what the experience is like for a person of color that walks through our community and goes to these spaces. And then I also, because it's not a one size fits all, when they meet with me, I sort of give them some ideas of what I mean by that. You know, what is it? What happens when somebody walks through the door? Do you have images on your walls? Do you have books in your library? What's in your liturgy? What liturgy do you use? What sermons have you given in the last year? What does your beam look like? All of that to get to have them start to see or to imagine what that experience is like. And if I'm not clear, all these people are white so far. I have another method if there's a person that holds power who's a person of color. One of the things that I have insisted on is that this group, like I said, must be leaders. And please do not put a person of color on this because you need to fill some diversity requirement. This is a DEI group of people who hold power, not a racial diversity group. So anyway, they walk through their property and then they come back and discuss, and they have a third meeting, and they use currently parts of the URJ's assessment on racism in your community. And I've tweaked the directions a little bit and asked not that they not follow that, but follow these set of instructions. And all of this with permission. And all of that together, I've had to be clear, the whole entire thing is the assessment, not just the stuff that you write on. And then they come back and then they report what they've learned. I ask questions, they do an evaluation. And now we're at the point now we have to figure out how to launch this nationally. Now you had asked me, I can't remember your name, but you'd asked me about, what's your name again? Karen, about doing this internal work and the external work. And this is my answer. For the most part, I know you're not a Reconstructionist congregation, but for the most part, Jewish congregations are doing a pretty good job of dealing with outside racism. And when I say that, when you look at the statistics of who shows up at the Muslim band a few years ago, who shows up, when a Black prisoner is going to be executed, or who shows up at fair housing. That's what we talked about. We do that. We show up. I'm not saying it's perfect, but where that train is going in the right direction. There's still lots of work to do. Where we are failing, and my colleagues also, is the internal work. We are failing miserably. And I remember I had a conversation with a very well-respected rabbi, and when I was introducing this, and he said to me, well, I hope you understand the work that we're doing on the ground outside. I said, I do. And I'm really excited about that, and keep doing it. So whatever external work you're doing, keep doing it. I'm not trying to get people to stop doing it. I want you to keep doing that. And then add, what does it look like if I walk in your house? And we have colleagues, Brett and I have colleagues that are out with their real life megaphones on the front page of whatever paper, say the New York Times. And if I walked in their spiritual home right now, I'm pretty sure that I would not be treated with the level of respect. I'm not saying as a rabbi, but as a person walking through the door. The internal work is never going to get a rabbi on the cover of the New York Times. It's not going to happen. And, I'll let that sit there. This internal work is hard because it requires us to look inward and ask real hard questions of ourselves. And so the phrasing that I use in the cover letter is Heshbon and Nefesh. During the month of Elul, we are to assess ourselves. We're supposed to spend the rabbis wanted us to spend that month before Rosh Hashanah to do an internal accounting. What did I do this year? Where have I missed the mark? How can I do better? And how do I make sure that I do better next year? And that the process is rooted into what's happening here. And then my goal is that each congregation will start to chip away at some of this stuff. And now for some people, it's moving too fast. For some people, it's moving too slow. But at least the work will be getting done. And it's just little steps, like every congregation picked out one thing that they could work on. And I'll give you one example, just to see how light this is. We have a congregation that has a rabbi who is a wonderfully talented, her voice is a wonderfully talented musical instrument. And when they were doing their walkthrough, they realized that they have this large grand piano on their bima. I was like, really? And they have this large piano, which is fine. The rabbi plays it because, like I said, they're talented, but they started to have conversations amongst themselves. Well, what does that say about access? What does that say about the music that we're playing? What does that say about inviting our congregants to play music? Because piano's hard. I mean, and people just don't play it. So they started to think about, what would it be like to put a djembe on the bima? Or what would it be? There's drums over there. Or what would it be like to invest in a guitar and put that on the bima? Susan Talvey, who's not a Reconstructionist rabbi, one of her former congregants is about to graduate next year. His name is Dr. Kawak Baruch Frazier. And she told me that, two things, because I love Susan Talvey so much, and then I'll open this up for questions. In my conversations with her, she's either the founding rabbi of Central Reform, or she's just been there a long time. And she said there was a wake-up call for her years ago when she was in the school, and she realized the growing number of kids of color in her Hebrew school. And then she went and got on the bima and noticed the whiteness everywhere. And that didn't sit well with her. She didn't know what to do about it because there weren't people having these conversations back then, maybe a handful of people. And she's like, I can't. I have to make sure that my kids in my school are growing up in an environment where they can be seen and heard. Now, because she had relationships, I'm bringing this story up because people, you got to think outside the box. I said, well, what did you do? She's like, I brought in ringers. She called her Black friends and said, I got a strange request. Can you please just sit in my pew? I don't know what those conversations were like, but or how they went. But she said, I got these kids, and I need them when they come up, I need them to see Black faces. And that was powerful. And as far as I know, every young person who is not white in that synagogue has grown up to love their Judaism. She also said when they started looking at the music, and she said when Koach, who's a wonderful, talented person, he is already an amazing rabbi, though he still has a year of school left. She said when he started drumming, and he's a talented drummer. I'm just not just about picking up drums. She said, and he started drumming, Black people just started coming in. So, and there's, I laugh about it, but this was a long process, and they still got issues. They do have a Black executive director who's incredibly talented, but they still have issues, and this work doesn't end. But what I want our congregations to do is to do what Susan Talvey did, is to start with open eyes, looking at what are the things that I have this problem. What's the problem? How do I solve it? Move on. What's the problem? How do I solve it? You may get an answer, and then you may find something doesn't work, and then you try something else again. Okay. Okay. Yeah. How was that? And what are your thoughts, questions? I don't have an.
Okay, beautiful, and thank you. Just because we referenced it, you read the strategic plan, but it's in service of a very pithy mission, right? Which I think could just as well apply to URJ or to individual congregations. But listen to the first word of their one sentence mission: diverse, connected, and engaged Judaism that meaningfully contributes to a just and compassionate world. And if that's not our mission,
yeah,
I don't know what is. So keep reading, it's all there, and invite, again, as short as possible, questions and perspectives so that we can get a lot of cross conversation.
Thank you. With all due respect, it's been wonderful to hear what you have to say, but it's not specific enough, because everything you mentioned, particularly the anecdote about walking the ground and the grand piano, it felt so one-time-ish. Mm-hmm. And just getting ringers to sit in a congregation doesn't feel genuine or authentic to me. Mm-hmm. So I'm really here hoping to hear very specific, ongoing ways. The examples so far don't sit with me. I really respect the work that you've shared with us.
So here's the thing, and I thank you for that. This, like I said, this is not a one size fits all, and they were specific to a specific problem. The alternative that I've seen is that people do nothing, and we can't do nothing. So the work is too big sometimes; it's too overwhelming. I have had conversations with colleagues that have said to me, I don't know enough about racism. I know racism exists in my community. I'm not an expert. I can't solve it. So therefore, and I said, to do nothing is irresponsible. And the example I use for my colleagues is this: rabbinical school only taught us so much. I had no class that taught me how to blow the shofar. None at all. And I go to my job, I don't have a shofar blower. I don't. And the reason I'm trying to get people to understand how simple some of this is, because we try to make it too hard. I didn't have a shofar blower. Rosh Hashanah was coming up. I cannot say, sorry, we can't do anything. I've got to find a student, I've got to find somebody, I've got to hire somebody, or I've got to learn how to blow the thing myself. And that's what this takes. And every community is different. And so if you look at the big picture, there's a board member who pushed really hard on this process. He didn't like how it sounded. He wanted more. And he kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And he also happened to be a board member of one of our pilot congregations. And he didn't like it, but he stuck with it. And then I heard him publicly say an entire convention, this is his words, this isn't so hard. It's not so hard. Talking about racism is easy. You just have to develop the skills. And the thing is that because white people and people of color, Black and brown people are living in this. And we are seeing you do nothing. We are seeing you be overwhelmed. But the overwhelm that you have is theoretical. It's not real. It's not the lived experience. And so because people who are white still hold power in our organizations, we have to start to chip away. The congregation in St. Louis is doing a ton of work. I can't even begin to name all of it, but I told you where it started, not where it ended. We have a congregation in Evanston. One of the things that they do is they realize that all the people in their organization that hold power show up once a month for a board meeting. So they devote several minutes of that board meeting to an article on racism and racial justice to start to get people to think about it. So the reason I'm saying all this stuff is that it's chipping away. It's slowly chipping away. And the people of color in your community will see this and they will start to work with you. But if they see you doing nothing and they experience racism, they leave. Is that helpful? No? Okay. Here's my advice. What's your name? Harriet.
Excuse me. When you talk, what would be helpful is knowing what specific steps they took that we could learn from. Reading the article is fine, but it also seemed to just involve white people.
Well, that's because most of these congregations can only work with white people. If you have people of color, yes, you need to take the lead from them. But many of our congregations don't have adults of color. And so but we still have some, right, but you're right. And also just because a person of color is in your community doesn't mean they want to do this work. Here's the thing also, racism is so messed up that white people don't want to tokenize Black and brown people, which means that they don't have conversations. So can you imagine I'm sitting in a community, or this is made up but real, I'm sitting in a community and all of a sudden I hear there's a racial justice book club, or I hear that there's a meeting about racism in our community, or a Black Jewish speaker has come to speak, and we have a congregant speaking, but nobody asked me. Nobody asked me if I wanted to participate because they were so afraid of tokenizing me. So as a Black person, I want you to understand that at this point in time in our history, all we can do is just chip away at it. Okay, good. And use each other. Start to, for all of you sitting here, if you know each other or don't know each other, start to talk across congregations, start to talk with each other about what you think might work. And then throw that spaghetti on the wall. And if it sticks, keep doing that. And the thing is, there's lots of right ways and lots of wrong ways. And there are lots of people trying and lots of people not trying. But the important thing is to try. And that really shows action and shows that you care, and that people of color will see that in your community. And they will tell you if they think you're doing it wrong. But here's the thing, if you're doing it wrong, you didn't know you were doing it wrong because no Black person told you. And that's part of the engagement in this process. Okay.
Thank you, Harriet, for that. But I had the opposite feeling. I think that I have to first read the strategic plan and then the essays to understand what racism looks like from my point of view, what it feels like from your point of view. And then I think just showing up, seeing Black faces is encouraging to Black people that is a huge statement. And so I think, and this is a very creative congregation, there'll be a lot of interested solutions to come up with that works within our own group.
Yeah, one thing I want to say about the reading is that no matter what you do in your lives, all the white people in the room, you're never going to know as much about racism as somebody's actually experiencing it. So the best thing you can do is start to learn about it and start developing, as you said, those chops so that you can start the process of understanding it. Another thing I want to say too, for communities that are working with primarily white people, I call that working on whiteness, not racial justice work, because white people need to work on how racism affects them, how they see racism, and they need to start to learn for themselves. Now, if you've been working on these issues amongst white people for a long time, that's great, don't stop. And when you start to develop relationships with Black and brown people, and they may push against some of the things you learn, that is not the time to say, well, I read this book, and this book said, oh, I read this expert. You need to listen and then learn and grow together, because it's so smiling. I have a friend of mine in Indianapolis, and him and his wife moved to Indianapolis. They're both professors. They were looking for a community they can raise their children in. And he starts to tell me that before they moved, that they read all this literature and they were told that Indianapolis is the place where there's no racism. It's like racially diverse. And I was looking at him, I was like, where are we going with this? And it's, it's a multiracial place and there's no racism. And I was like, okay. He's like, it's a lie. It's like, it's a lie. And he's like, but then he said, actually, it's not a lie. It's the truth, because there is no racism if you're only with white people. It doesn't exist. And then once Black and brown people are introduced, that's when it shows up, or people have to deal with it. Now, I'm not saying people don't have racist ideas, but it doesn't exist in your community. When people say, well, we just don't have any racism. And I look around like, okay, I can see why you don't. And so, once brownness, Blackness is introduced either in theory or a real person, that's when you start to see. That's why we have progressive communities right now who've saw themselves one way until they had to hire a Black executive director, or until they had to try to hire a Black student or a brown student, or so forth and so on. And then they had to really say things like, we can't hire a Black person, but we're not racist, and not recognize that how bad that's. So I swear we're not racist.
So,
oh, hi, Sue. Hi.
There.
I know, Sue. Sorry.
So just going to share a very quick story, and then here's my question. The short story was shortly after George Floyd was killed. I was talking with a Sunday school director of a Jewish congregation, and she was like, well, what can I do? And it's like, well, and young kids, preschool, what do the books look like that you're actually using? What do the faces look like in the picture books that you're actually showing? She said, but the only people I know of color are my teachers. Well, have you talked to your teachers about what they might want to convey? And it was just for me, it was so obvious. And for her, it was just one of those, how do I get past what I don't know? And I personally was kind of astounded that she hadn't thought of those things, but she thought it. But, we had the conversation. The thing that my question for you is, in what way are you seeing the issues with looking at diversity now analogous to how women were being treated when they first really started entering as Jew, as rabbinical leaders? And where I'm coming from on this one is, I remember being in the room with conversations when women were just starting to be rabbis. And I remember one woman saying, I'm a lesbian. I don't even know if I can even come out to my congregation because it's going to be tough enough to just be a female rabbi. When my son was growing up, his class, for whatever the reason was, one kid was half Jewish, half Japanese. Another kid was adopted from India. Another kid was adopted from Peru. Another kid was half black, half white. Another kid was half Ethiopian, non-Jewish, and white. Jewish. And that's just a few of the kids that he grew up with. So he grew up with kids who were Jewish, being raised Jewish, whether they were biracial because of birth, whether they were adopted. And I'm seeing that that's more and more the kids that are coming up now. And so are we entering this new stage? And so again, getting back to the question, to what extent is this issue of really bringing in more people of color into the community somewhat analogous or different from being a woman or being gay and being on the pulpit?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And so my short answer is many ways is the same, in many ways it's not. So some of my former teachers who were that first cohort of queer lesbian rabbis used to tell me that they would always get confused with each other because they all looked alike. And or we, I know a lesbian rabbi and they would think of just one, so and yes, so it's that first generation of female rabbis, which I have heavily benefited from as a queer person and as a Black person who also happens to be a rabbi. They opened up so many doors and had to deal with so much. But that was the first wall that had to start to come down. And the difference is proximity. So yes, God, I mean, some of the stories I've heard from those first generation of women and those first generation of queer women, so the first time having to deal with intersection of identities, some of those stories are horrifying. And I'm holding in my head and trying, because of time, not to let them leave. And I could talk to you privately about some of them if you want. And because, well, when you think about how fast the Jewish world moved on recognizing and accepting queer folks in our community, so that when I say queer, I'm using the umbrella term for LGBTQIA folks, how fast we moved historically on accepting queer folks, on ordaining queer rabbis. I say that's because of proximity, because people started to realize that they had a gay nephew, a gay son, and their synagogues are like, what do you mean you won't do my kid's wedding? Or what do you mean my kid can't come on the bima? What are you talking about? And they started to leave, which is one of the reasons, from my understanding of the data, which is why the Reform movement is now the largest denomination and not the conservative movement. Because during the 80s or 90s or whatever, because of queer stuff, folks left in droves in the conservative movement. This is not to bash the conservative movement. It's just that's the reality. White people do not have that same level of proximity to Black and brown people. And so this issue is going to be much slower. And then when you add intersections of identity, in that first example, lesbian and woman, that means that queer lesbian rabbi faced a different type of discrimination than just the woman rabbi. It created new forms of discrimination. And then when you now look at Black and brown rabbis who also happen to be queer, so I'm not just dealing with racism, and I'm not just dealing with sexism, I'm not just dealing with homophobia, I'm dealing with all of those things and new forms of discrimination that historically just did not exist before, because people can't deal with those intersections. So thank you for your question.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the, many of us here have been involved in some of the commissions at Central Recon. And I think that one of the problems is that Recon congregations, I grew up in a very Reform
don't have the RAC, they don't have the Religious Action Center to rely on for guidance. I've heard staff at on a Tikkun Olam commission saying that recon is so underfinanced and everybody's doing a million things. So I just think that I think the burden is so much more on individual congregations to do more, but also to feel more connected to the central movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there is a lot there that people could learn from. And I think just my experience trying to talk about the reparations effort in the congregation, I think it took people to get their head around even the notion of the recon coming out for some kind of issue for that. There's a lot of work to be done, but I just think it behooves us in the grassroots to be stepping up.
Yeah.
And also I'd like to say more men stepping up too.
Just to echo that.
In case you haven't noticed the composition of the groups within our own congregation.
I just want to echo that. We need to support our own movement. We need to invest in reconstructing Judaism. And if we are not happy with the materials, then we need to start having those conversations about how to support thriving communities, for example, in our racial justice initiatives or whatever that might be. The other thing I want to say too is I can't remember if I said it here or there, but in the previous conversation, is that the URJ and Reconstructing Judaism both understand that this work cannot be done alone. The URJ needs us. I mean, I'm serious. We do stuff that they can't do. That's really important. We do stuff that they can't do. And the size of them means that whatever they do changes the dynamic of the Jewish world. And I have had members of Reform congregation, leaders in Reform congregations, I've told this to Deborah because I wasn't sure what to do, that have reached out to me because they want what we do in their congregation. And my first answer is always, have you talked to Audacious Hospitality? And sometimes they say no, and sometimes they say yes. But the ones that have said yes, yeah, but we need a more hands-on approach. We are a hierarchical organization, but I would say we're not a top-down organization. We're very pluralistic, which means we include a lot of voices in the things that we do. And because of our size, that sometimes makes us more mobile, and because of our pluralism, that makes us slower. But the slowness includes more voices, which means you have more buy-in. From my vantage point, the URJ makes a lot of decisions that feel top-down, to the point where I've talked to colleagues in the Reform movement that have asked me for resources. I'm like, you have great resources. Why don't you know about them? And I send them links to their own stuff. So I'm saying, yeah. And also, before you start supporting other movements or other stuff or other organizations, please think about supporting Reconstructing Judaism, because there are some really, and I wasn't lying, thriving communities with some of the smartest people I have ever worked with. And I'm just floored sometimes when I sit in those meetings. And these are people that could work other places, but other places don't align with their values, and they'd rather be here. Now, you have the thriving communities of rabbis from RRC, but not all. So thank you for that. Thank you, Fran.
By the way, on chat was referenced a specific article from Evolve called it's RRA Renouncing Racism, which is one of many places where there's more of those examples. People have wanted more examples of how to begin the work, how to do it. It's not a one size fits all, but those resources are out there, both in the Reform and in the Recon world, and we need to keep learning with and from each other.
So my question has to do, Louise Weissman, we spoke from Ossesarlon a few weeks ago. The question I have is around people being willing to have difficult conversations. And the second is, in the world of RDEI, sometimes where it's based, I'll give an example, corporate RDEI programs becomes too insular to what their needs are. So people are learning how to not be anti-racist in the workplace, but then they go home to their all white communities and there is absolutely nothing to support them in what they believe. I came out of progressive organizing organizations. So some of the best examples, like even in the 70s and 80s, were some of the groups like Acorn that took people of color and people who were white to work on common issues. The Industrial Areas Foundation, Saul Alinsky's old organization, was great at doing that. What they did was they had people work on common issues, problems that they had together, and it pushed them into an environment where they had to engage about their personal lives and what different things meant. Where they failed, some of them failed, not all of them, was that one of the movement or the group network that I worked with, you start talking about it being anti-racist, and that day was like affirmative action, bring more people in. And what happens? You bring more people in, but the same white guys are leading the organization 10 years later because there's been no plan for leadership development of the people of color that have you brought in a more junior position. The answer is that there's so many other resources that we can access of groups that are doing anti-racism work. And my feeling is that we won't reach out to that in terms of what's going on. And the difficult conversation, on the difficult conversations, on the difficult conversations, sometimes it's not about discussing having a theoretical discussion about what racism means. Sometimes it's when the board wants to talk about the next steps in security for the congregation. Is it going to be based on armored cars in front of the doors? Is it going to be based on locking the doors? Or is it based on sitting down and figuring out what does public safety mean in the face of in an anti-racist society where people of color feel as safe as we feel?
I just want to say I get a lot of questions about security, and so I love the question about security. I mean, I know that wasn't your question, but so first of all, I want to say the person at the Jewish Federation of North America who helps congregations deal with security is a black man, is a black Jewish man, and him and I agree on these issues. What I'm about to say is that for the longest time, security plans of congregations benefited one group of people. They did not provide security for everybody. It benefited people who felt like police are the only solution for providing security in our congregations, or whatever they thought. Diversity, equity, inclusion needs to be included in everything that we do. And if you have a security plan that really it incorporates diversity, equity, inclusion, or JEDI, or racial diversity, whatever you want to call it, that means it is transparent. That means it includes all voices in your community. And you actually wind up creating a security plan that makes everybody safe, which is what people want. And communities make different decisions when they do that process. For example, there's a community, religious community, I can't remember where, that there was a synagogue and a mosque and a church or whatever, that really close to each other. And for whatever reason, they decided that law enforcement wasn't going to work for them. And so they take turns providing security for each other. There was another story I would say, but I lost. But anyway, so like, here's the example that I use when I talk to congregations. I may have said this example to you. The reason you need a plan that incorporates the DEI to make it safe. Now, this is a hypothetical, but it's based in real things. Rosh Hashanah is coming, and you. What I tell people is, when you start to think about your security, when you start your Rosh Hashanah planning or your high holiday planning, start talking to your community. Start talking to your community outside, because nobody lives in a bubble. It means start including the neighbors and the churches or whatever in what's actually happening. And also start including law enforcement in those conversations that we for this one time, we have all these folks that are going to be parking, taking up spots or whatever, and there might be more security. This is the example that I use to help people understand why this is so important. When Rosh Hashanah happens, unbeknownst to you, there might be a guy who, in this example, wears a hoodie, a sweatshirt, he's black, and he does his daily run. His run every day cuts through the parking lot of your synagogue. Doesn't care that he's on his run. But if it is communicated to him in some way, shape, or form that this is happening, he may change his route or be more aware. But in this example that I use, he's cutting through, but there's more cars and stuff. He doesn't care. He's on his run. But all of a sudden, he's now met with law enforcement that are asking him for his ID. He's a black man. He doesn't have ID because he's jogging, and he doesn't know what's going on. And then you see it on the news. This happens all the time. So to lessen that, to make a security plan that doesn't just keep the people safe in your building, but keeps the people safe outside, it needs to be transparent and needs to include as many diverse voices as possible. It does take more time, but it actually works better. It works better. And the security organization, I can't think of the name, that actually provides guidelines for security, says the same thing. Says the same exact thing. We need to move away from just calling our local cop, our local police officer, and have them come and provide security. It's not a one size fits all. Some things work for others. And one of the many, many reasons why having a law enforcement presence can be problematic, I'm not saying it always is, but can be problematic, is that sometimes synagogues just hire the same person over and over again. That person may not be Jewish, and regardless if that police officer is white or black, you are telling that individual, whether you say it or not, what a Jew looks like. So every time white people come in, they start to see that. So the first time a black person comes in, you don't belong. So what needs to happen is that synagogues need to take it upon themselves to educate law enforcement officers about who we actually really are and what the Jewish world looks like, and to remind them that your job is not to racially profile. Your job is to keep us safe. That means stick to whatever the security you're supposed to be doing. Yeah. Oh, you need to think about it.
Sorry. After Linda, Ellen and Ralph, and then we're going to need to move to wrapping up.
I'll make this brief, but at Washington Hebrew Congregation, we use the local police officers, but we use the sane police officers. My kids grew up seeing those police officers. They're not afraid of the police. And if they decide to invite a friend to a service like a bat mitzvah or something like that, the police officer knows them. They know me. They've seen me. So, and it's a rotating cast of characters, but when there's a new person, I walk up to them and I say, "Oh, I haven't seen you before. Are you new? Oh, I'm covering for so-and-so. Oh yeah, I know him." That is a simple thing that you can do. And also, you've got to look at them. You've got to say thank you on the way out. Shabbat Shalom. Who cares if they're Jewish or not? Shabbat Shalom when you walk in, because then you become not just a mass of people, you are the congregants. So if somebody says, "I'm looking for Linda Adams, she's got great," and they say, "Oh yeah, she just went in, she's down in the lobby," because I said to that officer, "I have some people coming, I'm going to wait for them in the lobby." That's the kind of thing, that's a pretty simple thing to do that doesn't make your congregation appear as an armed camp.
Yeah, I just want to say, I know we're about to wrap up. When I was at Elon, working as a university rabbi, I really can't control the law enforcement presence on stuff because the university provides security. And what I did during Rosh Hashanah is I met with the police chief and whoever was going to be providing police presence, and we met and we talked. And then I encouraged the law enforcement officers in the months that lead up, come by and say hi. Because on a college campus, you've got other reasons why people don't want police officers in their synagogues. So when we had like bagel brunches and stuff or whatever, I encouraged the cops to come so that the young folks could get to know them. And I also educated him on what we looked like. And we talked about their security plan. and our hopes, and we met in the middle, and it all worked out. And I really got what I wanted, which was to not have a law enforcement officer in the sanctuary. But they were around, which is sadly, because of college shootings and stuff, I was glad that they were around. But we came up with a plan together that works for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Actually, it's not directly related to what I was going to say, but I've been in so many places where just saying hello to a stranger, I think that's something we learn in school here. I'm so stunned at how often we don't remember to say hello to a person we don't know. And I'm not going to speak for Dutch Shalom because I haven't been here for a long time, but everywhere I went in the Jewish community in the East Bay, I had the same problem. I was a stranger, of course. But I wanted to stand up for those of you who may not know me. My name is Ellen. I'm returning from nearly 10 years in the East Bay. It's so thrilling to be here for this particular week, for this particular conversation. Because one of the reasons that I came back home is after 10 glorious years that I still feel very connected to. And I was immersed in a Black and brown community. I really felt at this time in my life, approaching my 80th birthday, I have to be home in a community that knows me, and I know where I can bring my experience to bear of life in a Black and brown community over 10 years that's so different from this Washington, D.C. area. So I'm even more excited. I want to ask a specific question, and that has to do with history. I'm a Jew who was raised by a father, very Jewish, back a zillion generations, who said who taught me no religion is the only good religion. And so when I came to Dutch Shalom and to the Reconstructionist movement, I had to learn a ton of Jewishness. And I was as much of a stranger, I would project, as many, many non-Jews were, 30 years ago when I started it. And I think we in this community, so Harry, to your question, there are small ways that we don't know that when new people come to our community, whether they're brown or white, they don't necessarily know our vernacular. And just assuming that we're not the same and we don't know the same thing is one really important way of reaching out. So this is the history question I want to ask. I have learned that very little, but that there is a huge history of non-white Judaism. And I was confronted by a young man who was identified with that terrifying organization, young Black men, who was very, very anti-Jewish. I don't remember what it's called, but he was being taught very, very hostile anti-Judaism. And it was very interesting to work with him. I was working with him in a school situation. And he reminded me that I did not know enough about the non-white Jews in the expansive Jewish history of 5,000 years. So that's my question. Oh, I miss it.
Right. Okay. 90 seconds to answer that, and then one more. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No, that's, yeah. Yes. They're globally Jews are brown.
All right.
Okay, we get, yeah, I didn't see you. Go ahead.
I just want to, I remember when we started this conversation on Saturday, you came up with the fact that, look around you, the people that you see are, majority of them really are Jewish. That's a very important statement. We are all of one race. We have to reinforce that. And I just wanted to kind of come back to the point you said today, that what did I feel like when you were in rabbinical school and you suddenly saw a critical mass and what did that feel?
I didn't when I was a rabbinical student.
But you
I do now, but I
do
didn't. I mean, I was the first Black student to matriculate at RRC. By the time I was almost done, there was 2 of us, and now there are more. But that was not my lived experience. I had to help educate and be a student at the same time, the leadership of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, and it was challenging. the blind spots that existed at the time, that people didn't understand there were cultural differences in learning. There were just cultural experiences of Jewish spaces. And that's another reason why I'm uniquely able to do this position, because I've seen the growth.
Well, and now that you've enabled it, it kind of reinforces that statement that a lot of these Jews of color, that they're here.
Oh yeah, no, there are people that are choosing. They are choosing RRC. So other rabbinical schools have a drop-in students. RRC is actually growing. We're still small. I'm going to keep that in mind, because of our stance on non-Jewish having non-Jewish partners. The first rabbinical school that said it was okay for you to enter our school and exit our school and not be partnered with a Jew. That was totally okay. That was a radical thing to do. Now Hebrew College is on board, and sooner or later, I believe all of them will be on the same page. But RRC was the first to do that, and they got a lot of pushback and hostility from some other folks and some members of our own community. There are students that enter RRC because Reconstructing Judaism has 2 senior Black people on staff. So people are seeing that and are making choices based off of where they believe they will not just survive, but thrive. So, yeah.
Okay. Food almost ready, or yeah. Okay. We're wrapping.
Okay. No, I'll make this really short because here at Adat Shalom, and particularly in response to Harriet's earlier comment, we're doing the relational work to find out from our synagogue members what we can do. So it's a process of getting input. As Sandra said, there's so much to learn, but also looking to within ourselves to see what we can do using the information that we're getting from you and our folks from neighboring synagogues working together. But we're always reaching out within our congregation, and that's what we have learned as it should be.
Thank you.
Man, yes. Okay, so the pre-closing, and then Rabbi Sandra will share final. This idea of looking in ourselves and your answer to Ralph's point about blind spots, that even the most progressive and thoughtful organizations that are doing the work, the more you do the work, the more you own those blind spots. And that is why many of us have found the traditional tool chest of Musar to be so helpful. And Rabbi Sandra is trained as a facilitator in Rabbi David Jaffe and Yehuda Webster's Dismantling Racism from the Inside Out, which Sarah referenced. And that is an incredible resource for all of us. And I think Sea Change 2.0 can meaningfully incorporate that. But the starting point of that, it's the exact opposite of what we hear in the nation, that we can't afford somehow to do the 1619 project, that we can't have textbooks that raise, right? I mean, that's the extreme, and we all distance ourselves from that. But a minor version of that is we can't air our dirty laundry. We have too much to work on. And if we, right, so no, this isn't the right time to raise those questions. The Musar approach is it always is. Yeah. And we've heard how fundamental that is for the long-term health, numerically, energetically, and morally of our communities. So I hope that we all feel a little more jazzed to do this work than we did 90 minutes ago. It's going to continue with a lot of us. And that includes, again, all of us from these multiple communities together as well as within. And the resources are there. Many of them were on the chat, and we'll thank you all for contributing, and we'll be sharing some of those later, particularly within Adat Shalom, since a lot of key people were here, but a lot of key people weren't. If people want to jot down while it's fresh, a couple of high points and send them maybe to me and the Sea Change leaders. We can help distribute and try to give a little sense of this to the broader swath. So please, while it's fresh, key insights, channel them. Once again, huge appreciation. Closing thoughts, Rabbi Sandra Lawson.
I just thank you. I just want to say, because I often don't get an opportunity to. I do get a lot of opportunity. I get opportunities to talk in front of people and congregations a lot, but I often don't get to spend this much time in Reconstructionist communities, and with this breadth of space. So thank you. And I hope this is the beginning of a conversation that we will continue to have. And you can reach out to me. And I'm going to close with a quick story. Actually has nothing to do with racism, but it will sort of hope for people maybe stuck in that. It'll open up some stuff. So years ago, I was in a class. It was about Jewish values and food, and the environment. And I've been a vegan a long time before it was cool to do so. I haven't eaten meat or anything in well over 20 years that I know of anyway. And I was in a class with an individual that everything they consumed seemed to be meat. And that's fine. And we were learning about the environment. And I remember he was so touched by the materials and Jewish values. And he was just stuck. He's like, this is too much. I can't do anything. I quit. That's not exactly what he said. But what's the point? It's too much. And I said to him, you just got to take it a little bit at a time. I'm not saying give up your meat, but maybe think about the other way you are affecting the environment. There's a thing that looks at how many planets you have if you have a large footprint. And I think I was like a planet, and I think he was like 5 or so. I don't even know. But you just gotta do. I didn't just give up meat. I actually chipped away at it a little bit, and then eventually it just made sense. But composting, recycling, you just chip away at it, and after a while, it's just part of your life. And it's same with this. It's just part of your life. And you'll see the growth. You'll see where you were 5 years ago or yesterday or whatever, and you'll see the trajectory. And that's a much better place than feeling so overwhelmed that you can't do anything. So that's my closing remarks. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all. There's lunch. The price of admission is introducing yourselves to people you don't know and building ongoing connections. All right.